Good evening. This segment is about the lessons the US has drawn out of the 20 years in Afghanistan. Now, some people say it's a bit too early to draw any lessons because the US has just withdrawn from the country. And in a way, that's right, because if you look at the Korea War or the Vietnam War from an American point of view, some of the best assessments appeared just now, literally in the last few years. So, of course, time adds a very valuable dimension and through which you can put very valuable insights. Yet, number one, Afghanistan has already, as a war, lasted 20 years for America. So it was not a brief experience. But number two, already, irrespective of whether or not there will be other stuff written on Afghanistan, and certainly there will be, but already there are important lessons America is drawing from this long experience and which are being talked about and written about in some of the most important think tanks and policy circles in Washington and actually in other parts of the US. Primarily two lessons. The first lesson is the whole idea of state building. We would all remember, if we follow international relations, that in the preparation for the war in Afghanistan, the idea was not just to demolish the Taliban, was not just to punish Al Qaeda because of 9/11, but rather to prepare Afghanistan for a massive exercise of state building. The idea was that the US is able not just to destruct the political economic structure that was in Afghanistan, not just to occupy the country, but rather to rebuild the state effectively from scratch. Some would say the same happened in Iraq, which to some extent is correct, although if you read the thinking of the new conservatives groups that were around and within the George W. Bush administration in the early 2000s, you would see that in their mind, Afghanistan was primarily a case for state building, much more than Iraq. To some extent, there was an appreciation of some of the variables that will make state building in in Iraq quite problematic. While in Afghanistan there was a view that it could certainly be done there. And you also see that in the way America engaged with Afghanistan. So there was, of course, the military might. But in addition to that, many American departments, many American civil society organizations, basically, of course, developmental arms and many other American entities got in Afghanistan on the back of the idea of state building, the idea that you can reconstruct the political, the economic foundations, structures in that country or in any place, and thereby really reform the society. Of course, you reform it in a way that will become more appealing to you, more conducive to your interests. In this case, more appealing to American view of the world or to more conducive to the American interests. That notion of state building was also very clear in the way America engaged with its allies in Afghanistan. Here I'm not referring to the British, because to a large extent Britain has always assumed very serious military assignments in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. But other allies who got involved in Afghanistan, to a large extent, their involvement was anchored on the activities of state building. Now, of course, it has failed. Now, super clear in the return of the Taliban right after the withdrawal of America, in the really no evolution in any serious way of the Afghani economy, and in the failure in any way to effect serious changes in the society, irrespective of whether or not we like the supposed changes in the society. But the idea is that state building in Afghanistan has failed massively. And here there is the first lesson that America will not, or is not, to do that exercise again. America can certainly, the idea in the lesson, if you'd like, in Washington goes, America can engage militarily in different parts of the world, and the might of the American military could be put on show and deployed and result in demolishing structures of the enemy. Yet, for that to be followed by state building, that is now a lesson that you should never do that. Not just because of the immense effort, time, resources, energy, attention, and of course lives that are lost in such exercise, but in addition to all of that, it always fails, even in a very long exercise such as the 20 years of American presence in Afghanistan. The second lesson is one of geography. And the idea is that the really big development in international relations in the world right now is the coming confrontation, strategic confrontation between the US and China. And to a large extent, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the dilution of American military presence in parts of the Middle East, even from parts of Europe, the new agreement, AUKUS, between the US, the UK, and Australia to provide nuclear submarines to operate in different parts of the Pacific, and many other factors, signify, underline the importance America puts on its strategic confrontation with China. And that confrontation will start in the Pacific, in East Asia, all the way south to the intersection or the meeting between the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. It is in that part of the world that this dramatically important, very crucial development in international relations, the confrontation between the US and China, strategically will unfold. And that's why the lesson that America draws here from Afghanistan is that any serious military presence, deployment, ought not to be in the classic areas of existence of the US, that is, certain parts of Europe, primarily in the Middle East, primarily in the Eastern Mediterranean, even parts of the Gulf, and in Afghanistan and the area around Pakistan. That triangle, actually, if you look at it on the map, with the head, the top, in Afghanistan, on the borders between Pakistan and India, two major nuclear powers in Asia, south to the right to the Gulf, to the east to the Gulf, to the west to the Eastern Mediterranean. That triangle, America has put so much time and effort and money into, but the lesson now is you ought to transfer the bulk of that presence to East Asia, to the Pacific, because there is the serious strategic confrontation America is entering. So, the lessons America draws from Afghanistan are not just about the past, but importantly also they link to future American thinking about international relations, and primarily they link the lessons from Afghanistan to America's coming big exercise, its confrontation with China.